directors for the Agenda for Children, out of school time. My partner, Susan Richards, is out on vacation today, or this week. Good for her. Recharging. Everybody needs a chance to do that. And I think it's killing her not to get on, so I wouldn't be surprised if she did pop in, but we're not expecting it. So she's leaving us, and trusting hands of some of my other colleagues on the Agenda for Children. Mercedes Soto is with us, Annie Levitt, Middle School Network, and Melinda Barbosa is also going to be helping out today. And thank you, Dr. Salim. Just let me know that Jim and Lindsay are both on. Carolyn will be on shortly. Okay, so objectives. We want to continue to build connections between our CPS and OST leaders as a community. We want to, in some ways, pick up some elements of where we left off. We met 3 months ago, almost exactly, at the very end of April. And a lot has happened, of course, and a lot is happening in this world. So knowing the weight of all that, we still want to continue to build our connections. We're going to share some snapshots from a recent Agenda for Children organizational program profile survey. We'll have some updates about what a lot of people are here to I think, learn more about CPS and its emerging reopening plan. OST providers will also share some promising practices, including from in-person programming and innovations being implemented during COVID-19. As probably most people are aware, some of our partners, our colleagues, if you will, in the out-of-school time world are already seeing young people every day. And some have been doing that going way back to the beginning of the closure with the essential worker folks needing childcare. So we'll hear a bit from a couple programs on that front, really informative as we all are thinking ahead to what it may feel and look like. And then we'll do some breakout groups, really two big ones for the most part. One for programs that are using school buildings or school-based programs, and then another group for programs that are more so community-based or non-school based. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps for collaboration. So just the agenda is pretty straightforward. We're doing the welcome. We'll go into the highlights from the survey. We'll hear some lessons from some of our OST providers about in-person programming. We'll get updates from the superintendent. Then we'll break into our two discussion breakout rooms. Maybe have time for a little share out, and then we'll look ahead. Thank you. Next slide. Can I do that? Maybe I can. Okay, so one thing that actually we did not change here is right in here in the middle. We're not going to use Jamboard today, so don't let that distract you. We're just going to be using the chat to take questions, and that's going to be happening after the presentations. Just on Zoom, folks, I think at this point are all Zoomed black belts. But if you have a phone number as your name, please change it to your name. Feel free to use reactions. It is helpful. And that's a button, of course, folks are pretty familiar with. There's some screen sharing that is going on, will continue to go on. We're trying to figure out how to best navigate that always. So hopefully we don't make you dizzy. We'll actually be doing mostly just a large group discussion today. And we have a shared doc and other ways we're going to be capturing notes today. And the session is being recorded for folks who aren't able to make it. We also, as people saw last meeting, we're going to do a whole write-up of everything that happens today. So you can go for it. Thank you. So the next two slides are our ways of being, sort of our community considerations, if you will, that we use with the Agenda for Children. And I'm just going to give you all a moment to look at the first three: practice empathy, bring courageous curiosity to dialogues, make space and take space. And I would open up the floor if there's a person who would like to speak about any one of these three. Just in terms of time, let's just choose one and maybe just share with the group what it means to you and why you think it's helpful for our community. Raise your hand. I might need help to call on the person. Nicole, did you want to say something about one of them?
No, I was giving a thumbs up.
Okay. All right, I have a lot of tiles here, so I'm not seeing everybody, but if the silence is consensus that these are good, let's move to the next slide. Okay, we round out our ways of being with these next four. Assume best intentions and attend to impact. Take the lessons, leave the details. Take care of self and community, and be present. Take a moment to read through those, please. And again, if you have a reflection, please speak on it. All right, well, let's move forward. These are really important. They do definitely set the tone. And as we get into the conversations today, let's keep these centered. Just in terms of time, I'm trying to respect time, not to read through all of them. But if we're all good, thumbs up. Everybody's good with these? I see some thumbs. I see some icons. Good. All right. Thank you. Next slide, please. Okay. So as you see, what we have on this page are a couple select beliefs, core beliefs from the Agenda for Children Out of School Time. We also have the CPS, Cambridge Public Schools definitions of equity and racial equity, and also a statement around achieving racial equity. Fairly soon, we'll be able to add an anti-racist vision statement that's kind of in its next to last round of feedback and hopefully collective buy-in. So we look forward to that in the coming weeks being shared with our community more widely. We selected two of the agenda's beliefs here. And what we really want to do, again, just set the tone for today's conversation. Throughout it, if you can consider how effective partnerships could demonstrate we're living these principles. So not that how we're just doing it on our own or as a program or as an organization or department, but how we do it through partnership. The themes, you'll see them jump out of these two beliefs. I'll read these. Lasting change requires attention to systems while grounding our work in the developmental needs and experiences of youth and children. And the second one is opportunities and experiences for youth are enhanced when people across different levels of power and perspectives learn together, design together, and build mutually beneficial partnerships. I think I'll read the racial equity statement here. For CPS, racial equity means the absence of institutional and structural barriers experienced by people based on race or color that impede access, opportunities, and results. And achieving racial equity requires proactive and continuous investment in communities of color who have endured centuries of systemic oppression. CPS is committed to dismantling structures rooted in white privilege, to hearing and elevated underrepresented voices and recognizing and eliminating bias. So I do want to take this moment actually to share the air a bit with Dr. Salim, Superintendent Salim, just to get a brief hello. He's going to give updates a bit later, but if Dr. Salim, if you have any reflections on this concept of how partnerships or how effective partnerships can support the beliefs and the definitions you see on this slide, just to kind of help us to set the stage for today, that'd be terrific.
Yeah, hi, thanks, Kari, and good to see everybody. Thanks everyone for joining this afternoon. Really great to be able to continue our conversations and partnership. And for me, I think, in particular, I think the first belief statement around systems is something that we, talk about with, when we talk about systemic racism, when we talk about the different structures and procedures and policies. And what I think the really important link here is how we can work together to look at how in some cases, it's not just looking at how do we disrupt existing systems, but also how do we create new systems that have more of that center equity and racial equity. And I think that in our work around trying to figure out, how there can be more of a shared case management approach is one example of how we think about trying to disrupt some of those barriers that exist in terms of being able to most effectively support our young people and families, in particular, young people and families of color in our work in the district. So that's one piece I think about, particularly with this work. I think the other piece is even more important, I would say, that in this phase that we're in around so much uncertainty, that there is an opportunity, I think, to be creative around how we are supporting our young people and thinking about the vision that we have for the Cambridge community. And I mean, there are a lot of things that are hard about navigating this in a pandemic, but I also think that there are perhaps ways of also engaging and partnering that I certainly don't have all the answers to, but I think it's really great to have 71 people as part of this call to help think about what are some of those possibilities that perhaps in a typical school year haven't been where we've generated some ideas because of just sort of the inertia of how and just the different barriers, but how we can sort of seize on the moment to do things differently in support of our youth.
Great, thank you, Dr. Salim. And picking up on sort of what you're pointing out in terms of what is new, right? What is of course challenging, but what is new and what the opportunities are to break new ground, to pioneer new activities, and to try new approaches, we're forced to right now. And I think in our work, we've always tried to push for innovation, but this time the innovation is, I think, is just pushing us in the same time. So speaking of, if you will, sort of what is typical and sort of status quo, we had right around the beginning of the COVID closure started to ask our out-of-school time community to respond to a survey so we could get a sense of, from an organization and program level, who they're serving, some information about staff, some information about schools that they connect with, a number of areas. And we selected some slides to share with you today because we really want to make sure folks have a sense of just how expansive the out-of-school time sector is and how we currently are set up to serve and support folks from across the school district, across the community. And then given that, also begin to, of course, look at sort of what is becoming, I hate to say it, but like the new status quo, or what is becoming new in terms of our reality. And what does it mean in terms of any planning that we're trying to do, any co-designing we're trying to do, whether it be around communication, whether it be around use of technology, whether it be around reopening buildings. So we are two different systems, right? There's definitely some overlap. And even within the out-of-school time system, if you will, we have lots of different types of providers. So if you could click the next slide, what you see in front of you is a list of the OST programs who responded to this survey. Thanks again for everyone who took the time to complete them, to work with Agenda for Children staff at times for follow-up questions. You all really put in the works for us to have a very nice, complete set of data. So you'll see the way we organized it is we have community-based organizations under one header of folks who responded, and then the DHSP programs under the other. You also notice the way DHSP talks about programs. Sometimes, as you see in the after-school case, you'll have two different groups, like a King K2 and a King 2.5 named as different programs. And so in some of the data, you'll see that's part of what you'll notice. All right, there you go. Next slide, please. Thank you. We asked folks sort of in terms of their location of where your OST program operates. And you see the kind of breakdown both in terms of bars and then also the raw numbers in the upper right. And so we were trying to definitely hone in on how many programs have their own space, how many of them are actually using CPS space, and sort of the other sort of variations of what else is out there. So you'll notice that out of the 49, you see it right there, the headline, 35 are using CPS facilities or are school-based. And that goes back to my just a small note that That includes sometimes multiple classrooms, or might be counted as more than one program, but they have, different staff, they have different young people, of course, in them. So almost 50 programs, and as you can see, the majority of them are using some of the space. Next slide, please. All right, so we wanted to think also in terms of how many of the programs were licensed, and one reason that's really important right now is because just like the Department of Education, the Department of Early Ed and Care, and also the state and city departments are handing down all types of new restrictions, regulations, expectations related to COVID-19. And just to see that the majority of programs, and especially programs that serve K through 8, are licensed, and therefore they can't just make up their own rules. As much as they do a great job of keeping up safety and supporting our young people in many different ways, they also have to respond to some of the new restrictions, just like the school department. Okay, next slide, please. So this one is getting at sort of the overall number of young people served in a typical school year, right? So this was asked about in terms of the last school year. And again, there could be, these are not unduplicated, so there could be a student who is in more than one program and then they're listed or they're counted twice. But what you can notice is there are just a high percentage of young people across a lot of the age ranges. This is, again, school year, not summer. And wanted just, again, to point this out, to think about the number of young people who typically are in our programs on a given year. And so thinking ahead, we need to pay attention to how that might be impacted by COVID-19 and also impacted by the school's model for schedule structure. Okay, next. Thank you. So this is a similar snapshot. This time it's about summer, and you just get a sense of sort of that we have more enrollment that's counted during the summer from the people who responded to the survey. It's also possible we might not have caught some of the programs that do only summer, and so we continue to always seek more data. But I just, again, wanted to point out sort of the different grade bands, how many young people are served across all those 49 programs that you saw listed.
Kari, can you explain the differential between the purple and the yellow?
Sure, if you can't see that, the purple is the typical school year numbers. So the number of students in a typical school year whether it's pre-K to K, you'll see there's about 800 in the purple. In a typical summer, you'll see it's under 400. Does that help?
Very much, thank you.
Okay, no problem. So next, and also, I'm sorry, the other thing you'll notice, there are less programs, as you see here, 37 out of 49 who are reporting running summer programs. That's also impacting the numbers. As I said, we may have missed some that do only summer. We definitely had some that do only school year. Okay, next slide, thanks. I'm gonna keep this moving. And so the other thing we wanted to show is just that we have kind of a networked approach of grouping our programs, similar to the schools do in elementary, upper, and high school. We have a similar grouping, and just to give you a sense of the different programs across those different spans who responded to the survey. Likewise, we wanted to give you a sense, and you don't have to memorize all this, you're not gonna be quizzed, but we're gonna be sending out this entire set of slides with all the other resources we're putting together after this session. So that will be available. Actually, most OST directors have already received a copy of this, but for anybody who doesn't have it, we'll make sure it's available. What we want you to just see here is that, our programs, as you can imagine, they serve many different grade bands and even cohorts. So just to point out, when we talk about elementary, there are some programs that do K3, some that do K8, some that do K5, and then all up and down, as you see this list here, you see there's a huge different range. So it means that our programs are serving many different groups of students, many different schools, many different ways. And it's just to show the complexity and the dynamic nature of who's coming in and out of programs on any given day during out of school time. This one's a little harder to see, but what it's giving you is, we asked every program to list the top 3 schools that any of their participants attended, right? And so when they listed their schools, then we put them under that school if they listed that as a school which was one of their top 3 schools. So really you can see every school is on here. And there's a pretty, I mean, in my own estimation, a pretty even distribution in a lot of ways. And again, this is to point out that our programs are receiving students from many different schools, and often they have young people coming in from multiple schools on any given day. And so again, thinking about implications of the health dynamic, the public health dynamic of pods, of thinking about how do we keep track of the students both in school and then what happens after school. It's important to know what it typically looks like so that we can make adjustments if adjustments can be made. And finally, we're just going to look at the difference between sort of the elementary and then sort of grades 6 through 12 in terms of the number of OST programs, enrolling participants from a given school. So the way that can be read is there are 26 out-of-school time programs that listed having students from King Open. There are 25 who listed Amigos and on down, right? And on down actually is not to understate or undersell anybody. There's still, even at the low end, a very hefty number in terms of number of schools served. Next one, please. And lastly, just looking at our upper schools and high schools, and even the charters are also listed here. So all of this is not to bury you in this data, but just to really show you, as we know, and as we expect anybody who's really familiar with our out-of-school time landscape, on any given day, a program is serving kids from multiple schools. Any classroom teacher has kids going to multiple different programs. Any principal is thinking about buses going to multiple different parts of the city to drop off kids at all types of different programs. And so it's just a very important thing for us to be able to capture, to have actual numbers. And then if we want to move to use some way to track or to do communication plans, we now have the portal, which is helpful because it connects to schools, students' ID numbers, excuse me. This is going to be really important as we think strategically about what the road ahead will bring. Next slide, please. All right, so what I'm going to ask you to do is to put your thoughts or reflections on those charts. Again, you'll be able to see those, and I'm going to explain one other thing in a moment, in the chat, because we want to capture your thoughts and reflections, your questions as well. We will not be doing much of a deeper dive into this right now, but we will be having sense-making groups that the Agenda for Children is going to be hosting starting next month, and inviting people to come and to look more deeply into this data, into this information, and also, of course, to plan ahead as we get more details about what the fall is going to look like. So we look forward to that. We will be in touch through the Agenda for Children listservs and our website. So again, if you have thoughts on the provider and organizational charts, feel free to put that in the chat. Okay, thank you. So next, I'm going to stop talking for a moment. I'm going to actually open it up. I can't see all who's here. I'm hoping, is Darren Corte, is he here from Cambridge Community Science? Great. So we're going to hear from Darren. There also are some directors and some staff from the East End House. There are some other programs. I know Megan Ryan has done some in-person work. I'm keeping an eye on the clock, but we want to hear from our out-of-school time license programs who have been running in-person programming, particularly over the summer. Some started sooner, as I said. And again, this is really, there's some lessons here. This is kind of as important as any other information I think we can get is anecdotal. as anybody, including our schools, are thinking about serving kids, having kids walking through the door, how does that look now for folks running summer programs? How are they doing the hand washing? How are they doing their pods, their different groupings? How are they doing arrival and pickups? Anything. So we can't do the whole orientation, but I asked Darren, and I also asked Easton, and we can see with time if other people want to chime in who are running in person. Sort of what are some learnings? What are anything surprising you in terms of what you've had to do, and then any creative problem solving that you've had to figure out that can just help to give people a sense of what this new world feels like for OST.
You want me to kick off?
Yeah, please do. Thanks, Darren.
Yeah, so I'm definitely excited to hear from the other program directors on here. Our program directors couldn't be here because we have kids in the building right now. But I have gotten a sense from them, some of the experiences that they're having. They're much more hands-on. So again, I'm interested in learning more from some of the other program directors on this call as well. Some important learnings, and sort of surprises, is that for the most part, the kids understand that things are different and that there's a change, and that they want to, they're sort of in on the idea of us sort of being in this together to keep everybody safe in the space that we have them. But at the same time, it's very, very hard to control their impulses to want to take their mask off and get right up in each other's face and go right back to sort of how things felt before COVID. So, and that's really across the spectrum. Certainly younger kids have shown a little bit more or a little less of that impulse control to keeping them separated, and keeping masks on has been harder. But even the older kids, we've noticed, have had a hard time for, all day, every day, following the procedures of keeping the mask on and keeping 6 feet apart. So just a lot of time is really spent by our youth work staff doing that. And I'm sure everybody, it's not really a surprise, but it's certainly a thing. And I think it's something that you don't want to underestimate when you're thinking about reopening, is how much time and attention is going to go into really just that piece of it. One thing that surprised us, granted we had to launch really quickly, because EEC was sort of back and forth all through the month of June on what was going to be allowed. And, one day it was, here are going to be the regulations. And then a week later, they put out a new list of regulations that felt sort of opposite to what they had said the week before. And it felt a little bit like they were just sort of giving us something and waiting until we felt comfortable enough to open, as opposed to actually knowing what the safest way to do it is. And so we sort of said, all right, well, if EEC doesn't really know what is the best way to do this, we took that ownership on ourselves, and we just created a plan and we sent it into them, and we said, here's how we're going to do it. So we sort of took ownership of that process without continuing to let EEC drive it, because we couldn't build something that was dependable without actually having the guidance we needed from EEC. So that allowed us to really think deep as a staff about the minute by minute, how we're going to move kids around, and keep them safe. And part of that was the drop-off and pickup procedures. So for drop-off, every parent has to fill out a COVID-19 symptom monitoring form for their children. And it basically asks, has you or anybody in your household experienced any of these symptoms? Has you and anyone in your household, to the best of your knowledge, been in contact with anybody who has been exposed to COVID-19 in the past 14 days? And then provide a phone number and let parents know that there is really no wiggle room in terms of, if we call them because a kid is displaying any of those symptoms throughout the day, that they need to be able to drop, or they need to be able to have somebody that can drop everything and come pick them up. I'm sure we've all had the experience with a kid in our program who's throwing up, and you're calling the parent over and over again, and they're like, I'm going to be there soon, I'll be there soon, and 4 hours pass and nobody's come to pick that up. We tried to nip that in the bud as early as possible. And we also let parents know that if you're in a rush in the morning or in the after, drop off isn't going to be a 10-second thing anymore. If there's 5 or 6 parents ahead of you in line who have already made sure they filled out the symptom monitoring survey, we are taking temperatures of the kids. That's not required by EEC, but we decided to do it. And I know those temporal thermometers, they have some issues in terms of reliability, but we still want to be able to catch a kid if they have 100+ temperature before they get in the building.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit more to getting the kid dropped off and signed in. So we wanted to set that expectation for the parents really early, because we've all also seen the parent who's in a huge rush, running late for work, and they want to just be able to drop their kid and go. But we set that expectation early. And for the most part, we haven't had really any issues with that. We've had some parents say, oh, I filled it out in the past 5 days. I'll do it on my way to work now. And we have to actually like stop them and say, no, we can't take your kid until you submit that symptom monitoring form. But again, in general, there hasn't been that much pushback. Again, I think the kids and parents understand this is a unique situation in a time where people need to be as cooperative as possible. A couple other things I jotted down. We were actually surprised at we could only get a few staff members to come work because of how late the decision was made that programs were going to be allowed to open. And we thought for sure that we were going to fill up right away and have this waiting list, and that parents were dying to get their kids into these programs. And at least for our families in our population, and we reached out all the way back to people who've attended since 2014, just to see where they were at and if they were going to need care. And we were again, this is just with our population. I don't know if this is what everybody experienced, but there were a lot of parents who, unless they absolutely had to send their kids somewhere to go back to work because of phase 3 openings and it was like an urgent need, most parents were choosing not to send their kids to our program. So, we have 2 lead teachers plus our admin staff, and we really only have, at most 15 kids, which works really well for us because we can put 15 kids in the common room and use the playground outside, and like they never really have to get that close. We're fortunate in our space to have a big room, right on our first floor. And then also across the hall from our common room is our computer lab. So we've been able to facilitate kids who are doing summer school as well. And that's worked really, really well. And then also we have kids who are doing telehealth. So like behavioral health, therapists and caseworkers. So all of those meetings are happening as well. So we're really just trying to, because there's so few kids, we can really take that individualized approach. And, the kids who are with us absolutely have to be with us. There wasn't another option. But also we're confident that they're getting the level of care that they need. And then the last thing, we were really wondering how we were going to do breakfast and lunch. And we were trying to piece together how that would happen. And Ellen coordinated, I know, with the public schools. And so we actually have a really awesome setup now. And thank you, Ellen. I think I saw you on this call, Ellen Semenoff. And where our staff goes up every around noon every day to the King School and picks up lunches for that day and then breakfast for the next day. So that's been, without that was really our final hurdle. And it was like 3 days before we were going to open, and that was our final hurdle. And we were fortunate enough to be able to sort that out. And then just logistically, we also launched a pantry at the community center in the beginning of April, which is getting, between 600-700 families a week are coming through. And we knew that we couldn't shut that down. Like we had to balance need, right? Well, we have these 12 to 15 kids who really need care, but we have 600-700 families who are coming and getting food. So we were able to create a system where the pantry that's happening in our gym is distinct and fully separate and blocked off entirely from our after school program. So that was just another logistical thing that we had to work around. But in general, I'd say that the most shocking thing, Kari, was the amount of parents who decided who are like, not yet. Nah, I'm good. Not yet. As long as there was somewhere for their kid to go. And then also just the level of preparation that we did, we haven't really been caught like totally surprised or unprepared for any major incident yet. Granted, we're only 3 weeks in, so I probably just jinxed it, but that's my overview. So if you have any follow-up questions to that, I'd be happy to talk more.
There's one in the chat just asking, were your kids eating inside or outside?
They're inside in our common room, which is big enough where we can put like those 8-foot tables or 6-foot tables, and we can put a kid on each end basically, so that they're not eating near each other. But we do have picnic tables outside in our park as well. So I believe there have been days where a couple kids, choose to go outside with one of the teachers as well. So we have a little bit of flexibility on that.
Okay. Thank you. And thanks
Sorry,
a lot.
I'll go if I can.
Yeah, if you could just take a shorter amount of time in terms of having time for the breakouts.
I will.
Thank you, Sharon.
Yeah. So just 3 quick takeaways. One is that kids need summer programming. We're running only a Daybreak program in person, so that's our camp for kids with special needs. So these kids need summer programming more than ever before, being so isolated for such a long period of time. So drastic difference in terms of how they've come to us this summer and the shape that they're in. Working within the COVID environment has been intensive, to say the least, and exhausting. And we're 3 weeks in, and our staff is beyond exhausted and tired. Just maintaining compliance, safety compliance, and the constant logistical thinking, and adapting to the weather, the who's coming to camp that day, who isn't, lots and lots of moving parts. We have 3 different components of the program that are happening all at the same time. So it's very complicated. And then it's expensive. So Daybreak is our most expensive program to run in a normal summer, but we are now staffed at 2 staff per 1 camper. We have expensive PPE. We have porta potties because we're outside. We have more transportation. We have made the commitment to continue to pick up kids and drop off kids, but we have constant bus rotations going so that we can accommodate social distancing on the bus. And washing stations, things like that. So all the equipment necessary. It's going to be, and I have no idea really what it's going to look like at the end of the summer, but the invoices keep on coming in, and we made the commitment to do it. And we're glad we did. It was the right thing to do. These kids need us, and we have managed to, even throughout all of this, incorporate a sense of community and joy in their day, and they and their families are telling us that constantly, so it makes it worth it. But it is really hard, and I cannot imagine sustaining this beyond our 5 weeks, our 5-week commitment.
Okay. Thanks so much, Sharon. So what I'm going to ask is other folks who are doing in-person programming, if you have a nugget you want to share, again, if you could put it into the chat. We also, as you're going to hear at the end of the session today, we're going to have a coalition meeting on September 3rd, and we'll be highlighting in much more depth people's experiences over the summer, and also preparing for whatever the future might bring. So I do want to actually pass it back to Dr. Salim to walk us through some of the updates, some of the information that is most relevant given where the district is considering reopening and the work they're doing with the state. So thank you again. And folks from other programs, sorry we didn't have time to hear from everybody, but feel free absolutely to put in the chat, and then we'll follow up closer to the fall. So yeah, Dr. Salim.
Thanks, Kari. First of all, I just wanted to say that I apologize that we haven't met earlier this summer. This opportunity to connect and to share update and hear your ideas is definitely long overdue. And I recognize we also need to, as we are at the end of July going into August, need to find ways to accelerate our partnering. And right now, just before going through some of the pieces of this proposed model, there haven't been any decisions made about the reopening model, other than we will definitely not open on day one with all students in the building. So I know that there are a lot of unknowns, and that what the model actually ultimately ends up being has a lot of influence on your programs and your staff and work. So hopefully, we'll have a decision in the next week to be able to move forward with. I know that'll be helpful for all of us, including folks in our schools in the district, as well as our partners. Part of what we've been doing over the last several weeks is to really try to evolve the proposal to incorporate feedback and ideas that we've heard from families and educators. And I know that as we start to talk about just different possibilities, there's this, and it was great to hear Darren and Sharon talk about some of their experiences, because there's also, there are going to be some tensions that exist around thinking about the health guidance and programming and all these other pieces. So the first slide here are just some of my sort of thinking around how we can, sort of make sure that we are collaborating and thinking about, as we've talked a number of times before, around the idea around, the entire day of our students from 8 to 6, and that coordination and communication between educators and providers needs to happen. So let me, so on this slide, sort of, we've already, I think back to when our time together at the OST Symposium in the fall, it seems like a million years ago, but thinking about how we can continue to look at what are our ways of strengthening that coordination communication around individual student needs. Certainly it's some of the work, I think, around the sort of the case management and having some of the student ID information is an important step towards continuing to strengthen that piece. We've talked about the elementary network, through the budgeting process last spring, and we'll look forward to continuing to move that work forward. Again, as ways of really augmenting the experiences for our youngest learners. We'll continue to look for ways of sharing staffing, training, and other support, and as well as how we can continue to expand that use of the community partners portal. And I think, just on that previous point, I think some of the, again, the experiences that have already happened over the summer with some in-person programming, I've talked with principals about how important that is to be able to share some of those experiences and those learnings that you've all had, along with other, in addition to what you've done. We know that many preschools and daycares have also opened up. So there's a lot that's happening both, locally, as well as, of course, across the country as well. So on the next slide, I'm going to go sort of to summarize just some of the key ideas around how we've been thinking about the reopening plan. Certainly the top priority is around safety and well-being, and thinking about physical safety, as well as the social, emotional, and mental health of our students, families, and staff. There have been a lot that we've done around working with a team of scientific advisors that have been a part of what we have done as part of our task force and a health and safety and facilities working group. So really leaned on them for making sure that we are able to learn from the most recent research, because as I feel like we are learning something new literally every day as more studies come out around how this virus behaves, and just the risks that are that we can help to try to reduce. So as I mentioned, we're not opening schools with all students on day one. The most recent proposal is this idea around a staged approach that provides more time for planning for educators and students and families to become familiar with new safety routines, as well as thinking about the other needs that students have. We are looking at this as trying to have, as providing choice to families, so that families can choose to be in person or fully remote, and having that option exist for all families. That we've looked at how we can prioritize the needs of students for whom remote learning really was a particularly hard struggle. It was a struggle, I would venture to say, for everyone as we made that transition in March. But in particular, our youngest learners, for whom, engaging over screen and using technology is not something that they were accustomed to, and educationally we know is not necessarily the best way for them to learn. Our students with disabilities and our English learners as well. We are looking for the school committee to have a special meeting, most likely next week, to make a decision on a recommendation. The recommendation would either be to have a staged reopening in a hybrid or fully remote model. We're taking a lot of steps to improve remote learning, and a lot of members of our community are involved in trying to make that stronger, both through thinking about all the tools that students are using, as well as also the different types of strategies that are used, and different expectations for students and staff as part of that process. And we've been engaged in a number of community meetings that we'll continue to hold over the next couple of weeks. The next slide gives a summary of what are a set of working guiding principles. Mercedes, if you could advance that. These guiding principles have also evolved over time, but again, the idea around, certainly health and safety is most paramount. We also continue to have as a central framing for our work around racial equity, and recognize that the impact of the pandemic has disproportionately been on our families of color, in particular, our Black and Brown families and students and staff. And we need to be thinking about that in all the decisions that we're making. With relationships continuing to be the foundation, and an area that I know we've spent a lot of time talking about, how we can continue to partner and augment the work that our partners have done, particularly in creating multi-year relationships with our young people, with our families. Clarity and consistency, particularly with regard to remote learning experiences, making sure that we have instruction that's student-centered, that we continue to partner with our families, support families with supporting students' academic and social emotional well-being, supporting staff, and also, nothing's going to be normal about this year, and that it'll require us to try to learn as much as we can, to be able to be nimble, to adapt and to shift if necessary as we go through the school year. The next slide then summarizes some of the goals that we were using as part of our learning plan from last year, and will have been refined as we think moving forward around nurturing relationships, around providing learning experiences that are both online and offline, and self-directed and facilitated by educators. Again, emphasizing the partnership with families, as well as using that equity lens of focusing on students with the greatest and most intensive needs. The next slide summarizes sort of the three models at a very high level. So every district in the state is required to provide to submit three plans to DESE, which we're doing this Friday around fully in-person, hybrid, and fully remote. And we've, as I said, taken off the fully in-person. The next slide actually speaks to more specifically, like what this, some of the things that we've heard from in feedback around routines, around specific schedules, around meeting times to plan and collaborate, and continuing questions around health and safety. So just conscious of time, I know I'm going quickly here. The next two slides are very similar, but they basically represent what the two ideas are at this stage. And this is, this continues to evolve as we try to incorporate important feedback that we heard this past Tuesday at school committee and public comment, and from committee members, as well as our task force this past Tuesday. But what I presented on Tuesday was this idea of 3 stages. The first stage being a time for staff to be able to plan and collaborate, to also start family conferences where they would be meeting individually with students and families. The stage 2 would be sort of a kind of like a soft launch into the hybrid schedule, where students would have half days, and staff would be able to meet in the afternoons to talk with their colleagues about what they've learned and what they would what they want to share around what the experience was on those days, as much in real time as possible. And then stage 3 is sort of moving into the hybrid schedule. And so what this hybrid means is that there will basically be 2 cohorts of students, a cohort A and a cohort B, and a cohort C that represents students that would be in actually more days a week, 4 days a week, including preschool, junior kindergartners, kindergartners in grade 1, as well as students who are in substantially separate special education programs and students who are English learners in the SEI program. The cohort A and B sort of represent, basically like we might do this alphabetically or just sort of like a split so that you could have 6-foot distancing in all of our classrooms, and classrooms would generally be 10 to 12 students. And those students, if you're in cohort A, would be in school 2 days and at home 3 days. And conversely, cohort B would be in school Thursday, Friday, and remote the other 3 days. It's a similar model at the upper schools where it's in 2 days, home 3 days, and also that group C with substantially separate and English learners in more frequently. And then the high school is still in a process of development, but the same kind of idea around cohorts to reduce the numbers of students in the building. And as I mentioned before, every family will have a choice to opt for fully remote or at home in whatever model that we're in. So then just closing, the last slide is very similar of having a staged approach, but instead of resulting in the hybrid, it would be remote. So it would be that, there'll be still this staff planning and collaboration happening in the first week, still doing individual conferences that could be, could be remote, it could be out in outdoors. And it would then be transitioning to the half days remote with staff being able to work and collaborate after school. And then stage 3 would be the full remote. So students would be engaged in that remote learning. And even in this remote model, we would still have opportunities for students with disabilities to have access to services in person at our schools. So that's the kind of the rapid sort of summary of sort of where things are with the proposal at this point. We heard a lot of advocacy around trying to looking at starting remote at the beginning of the year, and so we're looking and thinking about different ways of applying some of what we heard, and also trying to think also just around process, around particularly having families as well as partners in partnership around thinking about that collaboration. So how do we make sure that the remote or hybrid experience is as strong as it can be for our students, particularly for students that have more intensive needs and students that historically have been more marginalized. So that's the thinking at this point, and I imagine there's going to be a number of different questions that folks have, but I'm going to turn it over to Kari to facilitate the next part here.
Yeah, try that again. Thank you. A question as we're getting ready to go into the breakout rooms. So whether it's you, Dr. Salim, I think just actually, let me ask you directly, sort of going back to the slides that had the information about the OST survey, any comments you had heard from Darren or what have you, but particularly in terms of what you're learning in terms of this OST landscape, do you have any reflections that resonate or kind of are standing out as you consider where you are in planning or as we think about some of the next steps?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the tensions I've been thinking about, and really, I know that all of you have been trying to figure out how to also strike this balance is that, there's this idea, around trying to limit the number of interactions that students have from a health and safety vantage point. And so what are the implications if students are in person in terms of their experiences after school? So I don't have an answer, and I don't even know what's sort of feasible and possible, but that's sort of one question. I think that when I talk with many of our principals, they also have talked about the idea they feel and I think makes a ton of sense that, even if we're in a remote model, what kind of opportunities for, outdoor in-person types experiences can also exist. And I could imagine there being some opportunities, that to learn from what many have done this summer, as well as what also others might think about as being in collaboration with schools as well. Those are a couple of things. I mean, I know there's this question, from the school committee that's come up around, for students that are remote, are there opportunities for them who may need, more support to be able to access that? What does that look like? So be curious if people have ideas around that. But there's a lot. I mean, I think there's and I know that there's so many different factors. But at the same time, as I said at the outset, I think opportunities for thinking about creative solutions as well.
Thanks a lot. All right, thank you. I think if we're ready to do the breakouts, Ms. Mercedes, thumbs up on that. So you're going to find yourself in the group that you indicated you were most affiliated with, the programs that serve a program, that is school-based versus one that is non-school-based. And here's some of the things you can discuss in there. What did you think about what was presented? What excites you? What kinds of questions do you have? What needs do you see still not currently being met? Ideas or solutions? And once you get into your breakouts, if you can just start just piling on the questions into the chat space, we'll be in there to help document those. We will add those to some of the questions that also were taken from April. We're going to continue to bring those together. And we're going to try to do a monthly thing where we have a convening just to continue to do updates, get more granular, get more action oriented. So if we're good to move into breakouts, I cannot see my people on my. Yeah, we were in the middle of another response from the superintendent about in-class space and so forth. So there's definitely the need for more information and more updates. Maybe everyone would benefit. Kenny, if Dr. Salim, if you could you were giving a little bit of a timeline in terms of when more updates might be expected from the district that would be relevant for OST. You were saying, are you here? I can't see.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
So yes, so I know I went through it earlier as I was going through the timeline, but so our plan is to be able to, we have a regular school committee meeting on Tuesday, and we'll be looking to schedule a special school committee where I would be bringing a recommendation to for either one of those two models around hybrid or remote. Once we have that information, I think that will also drive a lot of the decisions around what is actually many questions that folks have in terms of what after school options are and what kind of measures we would want to take in terms of trying to try to reduce the risk and spread of the virus as much as possible. So it's I know we're still in a kind of uncertain moment in terms of what is or is not possible right now. I mean, I do think that I imagine that everyone's thinking about like, well, there may be a situation where we have, more of a kind of shutdown similar to what we had in April, and, being able to plan for remote as we are in the district is something that I would certainly encourage all folks to continue to do, because I think that if not immediately, then at some point, I think that's at least one mode that we're going to be engaging our young people with over the course of the year.
All right, thank you. And that you said the special session, that's within the next week or two?
Yeah, I'm actually talking with the mayor
Pretty soon.
Okay. Yeah. So,
okay. All right, thank you. Please continue to put the questions in the chat. We're gonna, let me see if I can share my screen here. Just to kind of close this out here. Okay, so to talk a little bit about other next steps, we are aware that Cambridge Public CPS has been doing a number of different surveys this spring and into the summer. There's some family surveys. I think there's some student surveys going on as well. I know the OST crew is really interested in some of the survey results, some of the summaries. I think some have been presented to the public through school committee, and I know there are others that will be coming out. So that's one piece that I know OST folks are interested in, particularly those have been helping, thank you, to get families to fill out surveys. Also the community partners portal, which a lot of folks are on, we talked about a couple months back, and a lot of programs are using it over the summer, will remain open. And we will allow for folks to also apply for accounts going into the fall if you have new staff or new needs. We also will allow for some applications or requests for Google Suite accounts. Depending on the whole layout, we could see more opportunities to communicate with students during, if there is a hybrid model, if there are days that go in and go out. So obviously we would have follow-up on that, but that's an important next step to be having in mind. And I won't repeat that one that Dr. Salim just said. There will be more communication about updates on the plan. We're going to do a coalition meeting on September 3rd for OST folks. We may invite some district people to come for a portion of that, but even more updates, even more planning. We have a lot to do. We wanted to kind of get out of August and kind of give us as many sort of updates and information we can have before the start of the of September, essentially the school year, depending on when the school year starts. And then there's opportunities still for OST providers to get involved with the elementary school network. And we are posting that coordinator position. Probably it would go up, I would say within, depending if it's for HR, but next week we're trying to take the next step to get that posted. So we'll definitely blast that out so people know that that's up there. Those are the big updates in terms of next steps. Are there any others that somebody's dying to share?
No, that's good. I mean, I do think what we can do is we can work on scheduling out our next meeting also sooner, so that we can just get those on the books. Because I think it, just moving forward this year, I think scheduling, monthly meetings with this group would be great. So we'll work on getting that done.
Okay, good. And I think another good strategy, which we'll do, is do the sort of pre and post sort of conversations to kind of help connect the dots between these meetings. There's so many things in motion. So I really appreciate everybody coming out today and then continuing to stay engaged. As we close out, please, if you have any last questions, put them in the chat. We usually do a closing where people say, a word that you're feeling as you walk away from this meeting. Feel free to put that in the chat as well. And if there are no other burning questions, well, I'm sure there are some burning questions. If there's no other announcements, I think we're going to wrap up. Let me just look for my team. Thumbs up. Is there anything else that we're missing? Okay. All right.
Good.
Thank you, everyone. Look for the email with follow-up from this session and also follow up on a number of whatever questions we can work with the district to address that you've posed that weren't discussed today. We'll do our best to get that information out. All right. Thank you, everyone. Later.